Welcome back to the Black Witch Podcast. It is your girl Marquisia, and I am super excited to be talking to you as always. We're going to go ahead and jump straight into this episode because, again, this is an early episode, so that means that I don't really have any new updates as far as with what's going on in the stars this week. So if you would like to know what's going on in the stars, refer back to the episode from last Sunday, which would have been the 13th. And I think that was the episode on generational curses. We're just going to hop straight into the episode because that is exactly why we're here. The word of the week is altars. And of course, I am going to start with a definition. So the definition that I have for altars is a table or a place which serves as a center of worship or ritual. I mean, I like that definition. I feel like it pretty much sums up what an altar is supposed to be. It is a place of worship or ritual, but as a non-religious person, those words can sometimes sway you or make you feel uncomfortable. So if I had to redo this definition and come up with my own, I would say that an altar is just a place to find your peace, because that is exactly what I use my altar for, is to find peace. Altars originated when certain trees, springs, or rocks would come to be regarded as holy or inhabited by spirits or gods. So this directly correlates with traditional like tribes and belief systems. So if a tree or a spring or any landmark was seen as a holy place, that place pretty much became an altar. And these became the main places of worship or communication with spirits. Altars are present in many religions. When you think about altar calls, they definitely use altars. It can take many forms, as in movable tables in the front of a church, shrines built into walls of a temple, and specific rooms decorated in candles and incense. I remember I was in Atlanta once, and I went into this African-based incense natural healing place, and there was a beautiful altar right there in the center of the room where everything was sold, and it was so beautiful. It had so many different candles and several incense lit and sage lit and dollar bills and pictures and all kind of things on it. It was pretty huge to me. It was the biggest altar that I had ever seen in person. I really love that altars can be extremely beautiful things. So many of the early religions use altars for their sacrifices and offerings. And of course, sacrifices are like killing animals and things like that. So that's what they were usually used for in early religions. Some of the first altars were located outside in nature on higher ground as to be closer to the heavens. So on top of mountains or just raised parts of the earth. The higher the earth, the closer you are to heaven. Altars aren't just for religious reasons. People who do not consider themselves religious build altars as a specific location to contemplate, meditate, appreciate, and cheer themselves up. Like I said earlier, if the definition of altar makes you feel uncomfortable because you identify as non-religious, or you don't like religious words like I do, like I tend to not really like religious associated words, you can just think of an altar as a place to find peace. It's kind of like a yoga mat, like you don't need a yoga mat to do yoga. It's something about getting on that yoga mat that just makes you feel more in tune with the poses and with yoga. Altars can be used to invoke specific spirits with specific names, but I do not recommend that unless you've been initiated or trained in that area. If you practice voodoo or Santeria or any of those, but I would not recommend on calling on those names if you have not been initiated and gone through training for that. As far as ancestral altars, anyone can build an ancestor altar. You have direct access to your ancestors, so you can be a regular day-to-day person who does not, who identifies as atheist or whatever it is, but you can have an ancestral altar because your ancestors are your bloodline and you have access to them. You don't have to go through any initiations or any trainings to speak to your ancestors. I believe ancestor altars are specifically important to Black people because it is a way to connect and gain support from the spirit world, specifically from our ancestors. Generations ago, altars were a huge part of our culture, and it was normal to have a place where you had pictures of family and you lit candles and you spoke to those pictures as if those people were still here. They may not have spoke of them as altars, but that is what they pretty much were. I always say, if I don't know nothing else, I know that my ancestors existed, and that means everything to me. We may be able to question God because we don't see God, we don't feel God, and we don't even have proof that God exists other than our own experiences, and that can make it hard for people, and sometimes even myself, to connect with the idea of God. But connecting with ancestors is a different story. Can't nobody tell you that your ancestors didn't exist. You would not be here today if it wasn't from the people before you who came together and birthed your great-great-grandmother and then her kids and then so and so on. Ancestors are just a given. Like, you know that happened. The proof is that you're here today. Marquisia would not exist if my ancestors had not existed. As Black people, we have such an intense history, especially when it comes down to being African American. We know the stories and we know the history of how our people got here and many of the things that they endured, but we don't know much about how they survived and the lessons that they learned and the wisdom that they gained and the work that they put in for us to be here. From slavery to civil rights to just existing on this earth as a Black person, there is so much strength that it must have taken to exist, to be here. We need that strength. Living is hard. Making decisions are hard. Feeling connected is hard. It's hard to express our feelings and concerns with the actual people in our day-to-day lives because of fear of judgment or misunderstanding. But when it comes down to connecting to ancestors or spiritual beings, the experience is different. They already know how you feel. They've already lived life and realized what's important and what is not. I feel like ancestral altars are important for Black people specifically, and that doesn't mean that, it's not for all people, but I'm speaking about Black people because this is the Black Witch Podcast. Ancestral altars are important for Black people because it provides us a sense of community. It provides us a sense of connection to those ancestors that we weren't able to meet, that we may not even be able to name, but we know that they existed. Let's go straight into, the building of an altar. What do we need? What are the essentials? We have them, like the major 5 elements. We have space, air, fire, water, and earth. And that is what I feel like is most important, to include some type of representation of that. So a glass of water, incense to represent air, because incense, they burn but then it becomes smoke, and smoke represents air. Candles to represent fire, graveyard dirt or some type of dirt. It doesn't have to be graveyard dirt, some type of dirt to represent the earth. Aside from that, I recommend a white cloth because white is a spiritual color, and if you can, pictures of ancestors or important ancestral artifacts, and that can be anything. And then for some reason you don't have access to things of your ancestors because of like adoption or displacement or a lack of connection to the people who came before you, just find something that resonates deeply with you, something that is important to you, because one day you will be an ancestor, and in some type of, in a different dimension, you already are an ancestor. So something that is important to you. After you get your essentials for an altar, if you want to begin to make it more elaborate, find things that your ancestors want. How do you know what your ancestors want on their altar? One of the first things I did was pay attention to weird cravings that I had. Like, it was weird because I knew I needed to add ham to my altar at one point because I started craving ham, and I barely eat pork. And if I do eat pork, it is definitely not a slice of ham. So when I was getting those cravings and wondering like, where is this desire to taste ham coming from, I knew that it had to be related to an ancestor. And I'm from the South, so ham and pork is just ingrained into our culture. So pay attention to those weird cravings to figure out what you need for your altar. Pay attention to any time you see something that you've never wanted before, but you feel like an urge to buy it or have it. That can be something as small as seeing like a small silver spoon and feeling the need to buy it. It's like, why do I need this small silver spoon when I have enough spoons and I don't have anything, to use that small silver spoon for? A lot of our ancestors enjoyed china cabinets and elaborate decorative dishes. So that's another thing that they really like. One day I was walking into a thrift store and I noticed a gold elephant, and for some reason I just really, really, really wanted that gold elephant. I bought the elephant, and then eventually it ended up as a part of my altar. Another way to know what your ancestors want is just to pay attention to things that are meaningful to you or your family. One of the examples that I have is that even though I don't read the Bible or care for the Bible much, I know that Christianity and the Bible played a large role in my ancestors' lives. So when I was moving, I found the old Bible with missing pages. The cover was missing. There was writing and highlighted words everywhere. It just had so much character, and I felt the urge to keep it. Eventually, it became a part of my altar. Another important piece that I have, I went to Senegal, to Africa for the first time, maybe like a year or 2 years ago now, I'm not sure, maybe a year ago. And I ended up buying this beautiful, huge scarf, and it has gold detail, and it's just so beautiful, and it literally came from Africa, and that was my first time ever being out of the country, so that trip was important to me. And of course it was Africa, so it was even more important to me. And I have that as part of my altar too, because I feel like that is a connection to the land that my ancestors came from. So yeah, just pay attention. A lot of these things are intuition based. It's trusting yourself. There aren't going to be any specific rules so much of anything when it comes to spirituality, because spirituality comes from within. The only person who knows what you need is you, but you have to learn to trust your voice. How do you use your altar? How do you go about connecting to those ancestors? How do you speak to them? I have a step process that I usually go through whenever I'm going down to my altar, and I'm going to share that with you. But again, feel free to tweak and adjust how you need. Like I said, there are no rules to this thing. It is totally up to you. First, you prepare your altar. You light a candle, you light some incense and sage. You sage the space, you refill the glass with water or wine, whatever it is that you're using. You unclutter the space, like brush off all of the ashes or anything from previous works, and you set the table. It's like setting the table for when family members are coming over, or when you're having like a gathering of some sort. You clean your space, you clean your house. You don't let people come into your dirty house. I hope not. Some of y'all do, and y'all need to work on that. But for the most part, we try to clean the space, like we try to unclutter. So unclutter your altar before you begin to work. After that, you approach your altar with respect. I like to get down onto my knees or crisscross, and I immediately begin to thank my ancestors for their sacrifices. It is at this point immediately that I usually begin to tear up and cry, because when I think about my ancestors and the sacrifices and the fact that I'm here today and I'm able to go to college and, buy a home and have a car and just walk into any space that I desire and, not have to worry about being hung from a tree. Like, that is so important to me. So one of the first things that I like to do is give thanks. After the thankful process, I like to go into meditating. So I meditate and I share my concerns, and I just try to quiet my heart and my mind and, prepare my heart to receive whatever wisdom and whatever ideas that I need in order to be successful in this lifetime. And it's important to remember, or I try to make sure that I'm communicating that I understand that success is not just about me getting the money and getting the things. That success is when I am able to achieve the things that my ancestors weren't able to achieve, not because they weren't capable, but because they weren't allowed. So I allow this time to meditate and be open and receptive to all of the good spirits and all of the good ancestors that want to see me be successful. So then after that meditation time, and that can be anything from 3 minutes to 15 minutes to 30 minutes. It's totally up to what's going on in the moment. I like to reach for my tools for divination, and my tools are my tarot cards. And so I have 2 different decks of tarot cards, and I pull them out and I begin to work with them, and I wait for the moment when I feel like I need to stop or when something pops out. And usually a lot of times I take out my cards and immediately something just jumps out of the stack, and it's like, okay, ancestors, you ready to talk today? But other times it takes some time, and I may have to stop, or I just may not feel like there's anything to be said. Maybe I just needed that time to clear my head and, like settle my heart, whatever it is. But you will know when it's happening. And I read my cards, and I see whatever guidance I need for that week or for that day. As far as how often I visit my altar, I personally don't visit my altar daily, but I know that there are people who do. I don't feel like there's anything wrong with that. You should visit your altar as much as you desire, but I do try to visit it on Sundays. Sundays are the day of the sun. It was recognized in ancient times as the time to connect with your inner self. Being that my ancestors are a part of me, I consider them a part of my inner self. The energy of Sundays supports self-reflection, spiritual growth, and replenishing your soul. So that is why I choose Sundays. You can choose whatever day you would like to choose, but I also recommend looking up what that day means to make sure that the energy of that day isn't working against you. And I'll leave a link below that will give you information about what each day means spiritually or energetically. Where can you set up your altar? The ideal space is in your living room, because the idea of a living room is that it is a place for communion. It is the place where family comes together and talk and relax and enjoy one another. But many of us don't feel comfortable having our altars in open spaces like that. We come from families that don't understand that type of thing and that may judge you, or you have kids or pets or just something that you don't want touching your altar, because your altar is a holy space and you don't want just anyone just playing with it. So if the living room is not a space for you, you can also use a closet. If you don't have a closet, then honestly you can use anywhere. Where I'm currently living, I don't have a closet of my own, but I do have a little area a little off from the rest of my room, and so that's why I set up my altar. The most important thing is to make sure that you cleanse whatever that space is that you're going to use for your altar first. You can cleanse that space with white vinegar, with sage, of course, or with blessing or holy water. Just cleanse the space as much as you can and make sure that it is an uncluttered space, specifically dedicated to your altar. You want to make sure that your altar has a space for itself, so that it's kind of like having an office in your home. Your office is your office, and your office is where you go to work, to get things done. So treat your altar like that type of space. Like it is a space where you go into to get things done. I feel like we got through all of that pretty quick. And it's really interesting. But I'm glad. I feel like this conversation was pretty good. So now we're just going to move into the question for today. I've always wanted an altar, but I've always been afraid of what people will think if they see it. My family and friends visit me a lot, and I just don't want them saying stuff about me because they don't understand. What is some advice you have for explaining altars to other people? Or are there any tricks for hiding your altar in plain sight? Thank you for this question. Let's start with that. Let me just say that I understand your concerns. There are a lot of things that I practice and that I do that I don't share with the people in my life, especially family members, because I know their beliefs and I know where their ideas lie. Like I said, I have an altar in the space where I'm living now, but it's definitely ducked off. Luckily, I have privacy, but I wouldn't. When I first got here, I was very careful about making sure that my altar was kind of hidden and not as suspicious, because I didn't know if the family member that I live with would be coming up to look and see and how they would react to these type of things. So your concern is very valid. People, especially family members of different faiths and beliefs, aren't as open to certain things, even though these things are more connected to who we truly are than many of the things that they practice. So when it comes to explaining it to your family and friend, explaining your altar, I would just say, this is something that I do for my spiritual health, and leave it at that. Any questions that they have after that, I wouldn't acknowledge them or address them. I would just keep it moving, unless you know that they're coming from a sincere place of wanting to understand or interest. And you can usually tell that by the way that they come at you. If they're coming at you and it's them and 5 other family members and it's in front of everybody, they're probably not doing it to understand you. They're doing it to, like pick at you and make fun of you and like make you feel some type of way. But if they come to you off on the side and they're like, what is this that you're doing? Like, what is the altar? What made you interested in it? Where do you get those ideas from? Can I do it even though I'm Christian or Muslim or whatever? If they're coming at you that way, I would say that you could take that as an opportunity to explain that type of thing to them. But it is also important that you know your stuff. Like, you can't just be out here doing stuff and you don't even understand it yourself, because then when people question you, you won't have any answers. Or when people question you, you'll become defensive because you're not even sure yourself. As far as hiding your altar in plain sight, I would say I have to let you know that altars can be as big or as small as you want them to be. An altar can be something as simple as a picture of a great grandmother that passed in your wallet, or an altar can be an entire room in your apartment, So there are definitely ways to hide altars in plain sight. If you live in a community where there are a lot of spiritual people, you would be surprised when you walk into their home and you just take a look around and you realize that there's a shelf that has a little candle by it in a picture. Like, that's the type of altar. I've researched and saw that there are a lot of African traditional religions that keep altars in certain cabinet spaces in their kitchen. There are so many ways to hide your altar in plain sight. I would say just work with it. And if you're in an environment where you don't feel comfortable having your altar out, do something as simple as having a picture or something spiritual to you inside of your purse or in your wallet or in your pocket, and just treat it as an altar. As I always say, you are the magic, you are the tool. All of these other things are just for decoration and comfort, and to make you are like placebos to make you feel more confident and comfortable doing whatever spiritual work or practice that you're doing. But it is not the power. It is not where the power comes from. The power comes from within you. So whatever ways you can find to include an altar in your life, do that, and be confident in it, and be well in it, and wait until you have your own space to where you can do whatever you want to freely. That concludes this week's episode. I feel like I touched on everything that I could. If you have any questions, as always, DM the Black Witch Podcast at the Black Witch Podcast on Instagram. That link will be in the description area. Send an email if you would like. Leave a comment, and also submit questions to the anonymous question link that I will also have linked below. We're starting to get more questions, and that is so fun. I really do like knowing exactly what it is that y'all want to hear, exactly what it is that y'all need help with, because as of right now, I'm just going with what I think is important, or like seeing one question and it's giving me an idea to do an entire episode. But I really do look forward to receiving more questions. Please don't be shy. But yeah, that concludes today's episode. I hope y'all have an amazing day, and I'll see y'all next time.